Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this afternoon's webinar, and happy Halloween to everyone. I've done a few sound checks over the last 30 minutes, so I'm fairly confident that everybody can hear me okay and that you can see the slides on the screen. But again, if you are having any issues, please do pop them into the chat panel and I will do my best. It is a little bit difficult for me to run the webinar and look at the chat panel at the same time. So if you do have a question about the actual content that we're going through, I will leave some time at the end for any questions that you have. So, as I said, warm welcome. An introduction to macros and basic VBA is what we're covering today. And we haven't run this session for a while, so we thought it might be quite nice just to run it again, as it is a really nice introduction to some of the more advanced VBA webinars that we've run in the past. You may have attended one of those or you may not. And we do have all of our previous webinars available on our website, and I'm going to give you a link at the end because it is a question I get at the end of the webinar every single week. I get a lot of emails from you guys asking if you can access the recording and if you can access old webinars. So I'm going to give you the link at the end so you can just jump onto the website and you'll see all of them right there. Now, just to set some expectations for this session today, this is an introductory session and it is really designed for people who have limited knowledge of macros, how to create them and how they can be useful in your day-to-day work. It's not really an in-depth session on VBA. So we are going to touch on a little bit of VBA, but if you're hoping for a more advanced VBA session, you'd probably get more value out of the more comprehensive VBA webinar that my colleague Todd has run in the past. And as I said, that is available on our website if you want to check that out afterwards. Now, something else you may have noticed is that we are using a different webinar platform. We switched a couple of weeks ago, and this is actually my first time using this new software. So I'm still trying to get used to it. So please bear with me until I'm used to it completely. But so far, so good. So very briefly, before we jump into the content, I will just give you a little bit of an introduction to myself for those of you who are new on our webinars. So my name is Deborah Ashby, and I am the IT trainer and subject matter expert at Excel with Business and Filtered. And what I basically do is I look after all of our Microsoft content that we offer. That includes writing our courses and also running webinars like this one for all of our lovely customers. So without further ado, let's take a look at the agenda for today. So as I said, macros and basic VBA, we're going to start right from the beginning. So if you don't really know what a macro is, never created one, that is absolutely fine. This course is going to be perfect for you. So we'll start out by talking about when is it appropriate to use macros, and we'll look at some scenarios which might occur, which you might use a macro in that particular scenario. We'll then go through how you create macros by recording keystrokes and command sequences, how you can expand a macro for more than one task, how you can launch macros with shortcuts. We all love a shortcut. I love a shortcut because it just makes life a lot easier. So I'm going to show you the quickest and easiest way, once you've created your macro, how you can apply that macro to your work. And we are going to jump into the VBA code a little bit. And again, if you've never heard the term VBA or you don't really know what it is, I will give you a little bit of an explanation about that as well. And I will show you how to make sense, or at least understand what you're looking at when you're in the VBA code and the Visual Basic Editor. And then we'll take a look at a couple of cool little things you can do to just expand on the power of the macros that you've created. So lots of stuff to cover in the session. I'm sure, as always, I won't get through everything that I wanted to cover with you, but I will give it my best shot. So let's start out by discussing this thing. What is a macro? Well, if you want to eliminate some of the drudgery associated with repetitive command sequences and data manipulation tasks, then you're probably going to want to know a little bit more about macros. All a macro basically is a recording of the steps that you take to complete a simple or a complex task. I can just see my chat window flashing. Just bear with me 1 second. I just want to make sure that everybody can hear. Can everybody hear me, or is my sound breaking up? You can hear me? Yeah? Okay, I just had a few people saying that they couldn't hear. It seems like most people can. I'm not sure. Sometimes your settings can affect the sound as well. So if you're on Wi-Fi, sometimes it's better to like plug into the main line if you can. Yep, no, it does look like the majority of people can hear me, so I am going to carry on. All right, so as I said, what is a macro? So we're going to record some steps to complete a simple or a complex task. And what you can do, once you've recorded the steps, you can then run the macro in order to automate that task. So it makes things very efficient, it refines your workflow, and it enables you to complete a task much quicker. So when you record a macro, which is the first step, my slide will move on, there we go. The first step is to record the macro, which I'm going to show you how to do. And once you record the macro, you can then run that macro. And then if you want to, you can go into that macro and you can review the VBA code. And the reason why you might want to do that would be if you want to make the macro do something slightly different. There's a whole host of things that you can do with VBA, most of which we're not going to go into today. I don't expect you all to come off this session being VBA programmers, but we are definitely going to look at the different ways that you can use macros and some basic edits that you can make. So I'm going to start out by showing you a number of different scenarios, and we're going to work through some exercises. And as we go through, what I really want you to focus on initially is, as we're going through and looking at how we can do these macros, I want you to start thinking about your daily tasks and also think about how you might incorporate macros into your daily work. So are there any things that you have to do every day, every week, every month that are really repetitive, that you would find a lot easier if you could just click one button and it does it all for you? Okay, so try and think about that as we're going through. Try and relate it back to the work that you do on a day-to-day basis. All right, let's come out of the presentation and jump across to the first spreadsheet that we're going to use. So just bear with me while I pull that up. There we go. Okay, so let's take a look at some scenarios where you might want to use a macro. So this is just a spreadsheet that we've got here. So it might be that maybe I work in HR and this is a list of current staff. And maybe I want to put a strike through any staff member that's left. Okay, so how would I do that manually first of all? Well, very simple. I would possibly highlight. I would go up to my fonts, click my advanced options, and then I have an option for strike through. So that's a very simple way of applying strike through to a particular set of data. I could do that even quicker by using a shortcut key. So again, if I highlight somebody else and if I press Control 5 is the shortcut for strike through. Now Control 5 is essentially a toggle because if I press it again, it removes the strike through. So essentially, Control 5 is kind of like a macro. It's taking the manual process of going to advanced options and selecting strike through, and it's kind of wrapping it up in a keyboard shortcut. So when you think about it, a lot of the things in Excel that you use all the time are kind of like mini macros. For example, something that we all use every day, the bold option on your home ribbon. If you click that, it makes your text bold. If you click it again, it removes the bold, okay? All that is like a little mini recording of going to font and then selecting bold from there, okay? So get that in your head. It's just basically an automation of some processes, some of which you're already using in your daily work. Let's take a look at another spreadsheet where we might want to use a macro. Now, you don't really have to understand what's going on in this spreadsheet. It is a little bit chaotic and all over the place, but if I click in some of these cells, I can see the cell I'm clicked in currently, that has a formula. If I click in another cell over here, that doesn't have a formula, that's just a number. So maybe every week I have a task where I have to identify all of the cells which contain formulas in a spreadsheet. So maybe I want to check the formulas, go through them, something like that. Now, how would I do that manually, first of all? Well, I would go up to the home ribbon, I would go across to find and select, and down to go to special. From here, I could then say, okay, I want you to highlight all of the formulas in the spreadsheet. I'm going to untick all of those. And straight away, Excel has highlighted for me every single cell that contains a formula. Now, this is just a temporary highlight. It's a selection, essentially. So if I wanted to make that more permanent, I would then need to apply a background color, just using my font fill in the background there. And there I've got all of my formulas highlighted. Now, that's fine. That's fairly simple to do. However, it is quite a lot of clicks, and if you're having to do something like that fairly frequently, that can get a little bit tedious. So this would be something that would be ideal to automate into a macro, okay, which we're going to do a little bit later. I'm just going to Control Z to undo that. Finally, one more example. If we jump back to our current staff sheet, again, it might be at the end of the week, so maybe on a Friday, maybe I have to do certain things to this data before I leave and go and enjoy my weekend. So maybe I have to come into this spreadsheet and sort column A and then print 5 copies and send them to my manager. Once I've done that, maybe I then have to sort column B and then print 5 copies and send it to someone else. Maybe I then have to add some subtotals and create a pivot table. Maybe it's a whole big process that I have to do every Friday. Again, perfect scenario for automation. All right, so that might be something that I might want to consider wrapping up in a macro, because who wants to do all of that? It might take me about 10 minutes or so to do it. Who wants to do all of that when you could just click a button and have it all done for you? This is where the power of macros comes in. They make you more efficient and they save you so much time. So again, start to think about the things that you do on a daily basis and how you might incorporate macros into your work. So those are just some scenarios which we might use. Hopefully that gives you a little bit more of an understanding of sort of what a macro is and start to think about the possibilities of what you can do with it. All right, let's go to the Budget 2017 spreadsheet. Now, the first thing I'm going to show you is just how you run a macro that's already been created, okay? We are going to create one, so don't worry about that. But first of all, I just want to show you how you find your macros and how you run them in a spreadsheet, okay? So, first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at this spreadsheet. Now, how can we tell, and you can type this into the chat panel if you know the answer, how can I tell if I've been sent an Excel file, how might I tell if that has macros in it? Does anybody know? If you type it into the chat panel. Yes, got some great answers here. Okay, perfect. Yes, if you can see .xlsm as the file extension at the top. So if you cast your eyes to the top, you'll see that my file extension is .xlsm, and that basically means it's got macros in it. So if you were to look, if I just bring up File Explorer for 1 second, this is my folder with all of my practice files in it, and you can see they all have a file extension of .xlsm, okay? Macro-enabled workbooks. Now, if for some reason you can't see the file extension when you're in File Explorer, just remember that you just need to go to View and make sure that you have this little checkbox checked, File Name Extensions. You'll see if I turn that off, they disappear, and if I click it, they come back again. So it's always worth checking. Another thing that might happen, which will alert you to the fact that you've got macros in your workbook, is, again, if you're sent a file from someone and you open it, you'll probably get some kind of notification across the top, okay? And this really depends on your macro security settings. So again, I just want to briefly talk about that because this is quite important. It's worth reviewing what your macro security settings are. And you can find them, and this is a little bit of a long process because they're quite well hidden. If you go to the File menu and go down to Options, and you want to go into this option here, Trust Center, and then Trust Center Settings. Okay, and then once you're in there, we have an option for our macro settings, and I have mine set to disable all macros with notification, and I like to have my setting set like that. Because what that basically means is if someone sends me a spreadsheet that has macros in it, when I open it, it's going to notify me and it's going to ask me if I want to enable those macros. Now, why is that important? Well, sometimes you might have a macro which has some potentially dangerous code in it. So if you open it, it might run on your spreadsheet and cause some problems. So I just like to make sure when I'm opening that, I know it's coming from a trusted source. So I have mine set to disable all macros with notification. All right. So I would advise that you do go in and just have a quick review of your macro settings. So that is another way that you will kind of be alert to the fact that the spreadsheet does contain macros. All right, so now we've got that out of the way, how can we find what macros are in the spreadsheet? Well, there are two areas in Excel where you will find macros if there have been any created. Now, as I said, this spreadsheet does already have some macros in it, which I want to show you. Now, the two areas where you'll be able to find any macros that you have stored are on the developer ribbon, which is just here. And if you click on the macros button, this is where you'll see any macros that you have in your workbook. Okay, now again, if you don't see the developer ribbon in your Excel, this is a ribbon that you have to turn on. So it's not automatically turned on for you. Okay, so if you don't have it, a simple way of doing it is going to File, going down to Options, and I think it's in Customize Ribbon. Yes, there it is. So if you scroll down, just make sure that you've got a tick in the developer option just here, and that will give you access to the developer ribbon and this little section here where you can control your macros. However, that's not the only place where you have macros. You also have them on the View ribbon in this last little button here. So you don't have as many options, but you can view your macros and you can also record a macro from the View ribbon. So either or, it doesn't matter which one you choose, they will both do exactly the same. I always tend to go to the developer ribbon, so that's what I'm going to do throughout the session today, just to keep things consistent and so that I don't completely confuse myself. All right, so let's click on the macros button and take a look at what we've got in here. So I've got a few macros, which I can choose to run if I want to. And you can probably see this is fairly straightforward how you would do that. I would select a macro and then we have a run button just here. Okay, so let's test that. I'm going to highlight some cells first of all. So on this spreadsheet, I'm going to highlight cells, what have we got? B5 to D7. And I'm going to run one of the macros on these cells. So I'm going to click my macros button. And the one that I'm going to run is this one here, values in millions. And what this macro is basically set up to do is it's going to take those values, which are currently showing as millions, and it's going to convert them to one decimal place. So if I cancel out of there for a moment, if we take this one here, which is currently 26,700,000, it's just going to change that to 26.7, okay? And that's a macro that I already created. So let's see it in action. We're going to highlight, going to go to macros, select values in millions, and run. Okay, so instead of me going in and doing multiple clicks to get this result, I've clicked one button and it's produced that result for me because it's automated those steps. All right, so reasonably straightforward. There is an even quicker way to run your macro, which again, I will show you in a moment. You can actually add them to your quick access toolbar. So again, if there's a macro that you run all the time, you can record it and then you can add it as a button on your quick access toolbar. And we're gonna do that once we create our own macro. Hopefully that makes sense. So I'm just going to take a quick pause and just make sure that that is making sense to everybody so far. If you just want to type into the chat panel if that's all making sense so far. Yep, yes. Fabulous. Thanks very much, guys. I do like to check. I can see I've got a couple of questions coming in. Okay, I will get to these questions at the end, so don't think I'm ignoring you. I will come to them at the end of the session. Thank you, guys. All right, so that's the first one that we've done. Now with that macro, again, if we go back and look at that macro closely, so the values in millions macro, if we click on the options button, we can also see if we have a shortcut key assigned to that macro. And you can see here, we've got the values in millions. The shortcut key is Control-Shift-M. And you'll see again, when we create a macro, we do have the opportunity to assign a shortcut key to that macro. Again, just making the whole process of applying the macro a lot quicker. Now, I will say a little bit of a warning when you're deciding what shortcut keys to use. Please don't go and assign something like Control-C or Control-V or something that's already been used in Excel, okay? This is why I add in Shift, because there aren't too many shortcut keys which are Control-Shift. So I will always, if assigning a shortcut key, we'll do Control-Shift and then a letter. And in this example, you can see that that is Control-Shift-M. Okay, so that's how you can see the shortcut key that you've got assigned. So let's just test to make sure that works. I'm going to highlight a different cell range and Control-Shift-M, and there we go. Very quickly, that macro has been run on that data. All right, so pretty easy so far, but we are dealing with macros that have already been created. So let's minimize and jump across to another spreadsheet. So I'm just going to open up the next spreadsheet, which is, oh, sorry, no, I'm just going to stay on the same spreadsheet, just a different tab. I'm going to go to this one here, mixed names. So this is another example of using a macro that's already been created. So what do we have here? Again, data is a little bit all over the place, but I think from this data here, what this person, this user, is trying to do is clean their data. I can see that that's what they're trying to do. So in column A, we have a list of names, and these names aren't particularly consistent. So we can see that they are all in uppercase, and we have some weird spacing going on with some of these. And I think what we're trying to do in this column, in column B, is essentially clean up this data so we have a nice data set. And if I click on the first one here in B2 and look up in the formula bar, I can see that we have a little formula going on here, the proper and the trim command, okay, or functions, I should say. Now, if you're not familiar with those, and we do cover these in a lot of our other sessions, I feel like I'm always training people on proper and trim. We cover it in pivot tables, cleaning data, pretty much everything. Two functions really useful. The proper function will take your uppercase characters and convert them into what we call proper case, so as you see here. And the trim function will remove any erroneous spaces, any spaces we've got in the middle there. So what we've done here is we've applied that to all of the names in here, okay, to make them look nice and consistent. Now, what I would normally do in this scenario is, now that we've got both of these, now we've got this cleaned up column of data, I would probably go in and I would copy and paste just the values over the top of this data here. Now, if you're wondering why I can't just go in and delete the duplicate, it's because I'm going to get an error, okay? And that is because we have formulas in this column, which are cleaning the data, which refer to this column. So the way to get around it is to copy and then paste just the values over column A, all right? Pasting values will throw away any underlying formulas and just paste what you see on the screen, okay? This is something I do all the time, and this is something which I like to have automated in a macro. So let's see how we can do that. We're going to create a macro, which is going to copy this column and then paste just the values directly over the top. So what you should see is, if the macro works correctly, is when I'm clicked in cell B2, you will no longer see this formula sitting underneath. Okay, so fingers crossed the macro will work correctly when we do it. So let's highlight column B. And we've already got a macro set up for this. This is another example of using a macro that we've already created. And let's click on macros. And I am going to select convert formulas to values. And again, I could check, if I go to options, I can see that we have a shortcut key there of Control-Shift-V, which I'm not going to use at the moment, but I'm just curious. And I'm going to click run. So now, if I click on there, you should see in the formula bar that it's done away with those underlying formulas and we just have the values. All right, so another example of a formula in action. Let's just use that shortcut key as well to make sure that that's working. If I go to column I, if I click on my data, you'll see that again we have a formula sitting behind this data. And if I highlight column I, and I think the shortcut key was Control-Shift-V, now when I click, you can see that those underlying formulas have disappeared. All right, so again, another example of how to run a macro that's already been created and also how to use the shortcut key. Is everybody with me so far? Have we fallen asleep or are we okay? Oh, I can see a lot of questions coming in. As I said, if you can just hold your questions until the end, because it is a little bit difficult for me to kind of answer and keep the session flowing. Wonderful. Okay, everyone seems good so far. Fantastic. All right, let's look at another one. One more example before we actually create our macro. I'm going to open another spreadsheet for this one. Okay, this is a slightly different example. So what we've got here is we have a list of names. So we have the name, we have company, business address, some location information, website, and that kind of repeats down. Okay, so we have that for various different people, the same information. Now, I'm looking at this spreadsheet and I'm thinking that this data would be much easier to work with if we could separate the fields. So, for example, get all of the names to appear in column D, all of the addresses in column E, so on and so forth. So essentially, instead of having my data running down the page, I want to have it running across the page. And I have a macro set up that's going to do that for me. Now, the macro is basically doing a copy of this data, and then it's going to do a paste, but it's going to paste and transpose, which may not be a function that you've used before. If you look in your paste options in the paste button, you do have a transpose button, which essentially switches your data so it runs horizontally as opposed to vertically down the page. So that's what this macro is. It's going to copy the data, do a paste special, transpose, and paste it across the page. Okay. What we've also done, an additional thing here to make it even easier for people, is we've put in a little button, and this is just a shape that we've drawn with some text, so that when we click on this button, it's going to execute that macro. All right, so this is another way that you might want to add a bit of interactivity into your spreadsheet. So let's see how much data we've got. I think we've got quite a lot of data. Now, if you want to jump down to the bottom of your data to see how many rows, there are a few different ways that you could do that. One way, which is lesser known, I think, is if you click in the first cell at the top and just double click on the bottom of the cell, it will jump you down to that very last row. So I can see that I have 2,400 rows of data, so quite a lot. I'm going to double click the top of the cell to jump to the top again. So what I'm going to do now is click this button, and hopefully my macro will run and I will get my data transposed horizontally across the page. So let's try. Let's click it. And because we do have quite a lot of data, this can take a few seconds. So take a swig of your coffee while it's thinking. And there we go. So the macro has done exactly what I was expecting. We've got all the names in column D, and we've got everything separated out nicely. The main point of me showing you that is just to show you a different way that you can do it, and also the fact that you can assign macros to objects. So that might be a shape, or maybe a picture, or maybe some text in your spreadsheets. Okay, so really, really useful. Great. Okay, let's get into it. Let's start and record our first macro. I'm going to jump back to our introduction spreadsheet, which I think is that one. Yes, it is. And we are going to go back to, where are we going to go back to on here? I'm going to go to the formulas sheet. All right, so at the start, we took a look at this example where we highlighted all of the cells where there was a formula contained in that cell. So we're going to do something similar, but we're going to record a macro to do it for us. Now this time, instead of highlighting all of the formulas on this spreadsheet, we're going to highlight all of the pure numbers. So things like this that we have in cell L3. So this is just a pure number. There's no formula behind it. And I want to find where are all the pure numbers on this spreadsheet. What I would do first, and I would advise you to do this if you're thinking about recording a macro, is get the steps that you need to take straight in your head before you launch into recording it, okay? So run through the process first. If necessary, write down the steps, because once you start recording, it's going to record everything that you do. So you kind of don't really want to start recording and then think, oh, where do I need to go? And then start messing around looking through ribbons for the commands, okay? Because it is going to record every click that you make, all right? So make sure that you have those steps identified first before you go in to record your macro. So I'm going to do that very quickly. So I'm thinking I want to highlight all of the constants or all of the regular pure numbers. So that would involve me going to the home ribbon, find and select, go to special, and I'm going to highlight what we call constants, so pure numbers. And I'm just going to highlight the numbers and click on OK. So that's kind of what I want it to do. And I then want it to apply highlighting to that. And then I don't want my macro to end with everything highlighted on my spreadsheet. So everything is currently selected. I want it to click off so that we have that recorded as well. So I'm going to say I want you to click back into cell A1. Those are the steps I'm going to record and wrap up in a nice little macro. So let me Control Z to undo the work that we just did. And let's go into the macro recorder. Okay, this is the fun stuff. So we're going to go to the developer ribbon. And as I said, you could go to the view ribbon if you wanted to. And we are going to go to the record macro button at the top here. Now, incidentally, before we do that, and let me just, I'm going to have to minimize this slightly because I can't see my status bar when I'm on a webinar. If you look right at the bottom of your screen in the status bar, can you see this little icon just here next to where it says ready? It's right in the corner on the left-hand side. This is your little macro recording button. So this will tell you if you've got a macro currently recording, if you haven't, and it's always useful to have that down there. You can stop your macros recording using this little button, so you don't have to go up to the ribbons if you want to. Now again, if you can't see that, it's worth turning it on. And you turn it on by right-clicking in the status bar and making sure you just have this macro recording option with a tick next to it. You'll see if I untick it, it disappears. If I tick it, it's back again. All right, so worth turning that on as well. All right, let's record our macro. I'm going to go up to the developer ribbon and I'm going to select record macro. Now, the first thing you need to do is give your macro a name. And we're going to call this, let me just see what name I've decided to assign it. We're going to call it highlight. Underscore number underscore cells, because it's going to highlight cells. I'm going to assign a shortcut key to it. So again, as I said, I like to always add in a shift, so Control Shift and then a letter. You don't have to press Control when you're doing this. The control's already there. Okay, so just Shift N will give me Control Shift N. And then I need to select where I need to, or where I want to store this macro. And this is a really important point as well. So if you want this macro just available in this workbook, then select this workbook. All right. That means if you open up another workbook, you won't be able to utilize that particular macro. Okay, which might be fine in a lot of scenarios. Sometimes you might want to create a macro that's available every single time you open a new workbook. And if that is the case, you would save it into this thing here, personal macro workbook. Okay, that will make it available across all of your workbooks. I'm going to save mine into this workbook. And I always like to add a description so that anybody, if I'm sending this spreadsheet to somebody, they can look at this and they can see exactly what that macro is going to do. So I'm going to say this macro highlights number cells in this workbook only. Now, as soon as I click OK, I am in recording mode, and everything I do from that point onwards is being recorded, okay? So that's why I said it's really important, note down your steps, have it in your mind what you want to do. So I click OK. And you can see now my icon up here has changed to stop recording, so that's showing you that I'm currently recording my macro. So let's do it. We're going to go to the home ribbon. I'm going to go to Find and Select, go to Special. I'm going to select constants because I want those pure numbers. And I'm going to click OK. So it's highlighted them. I now want to make that, or it's selected them, I should say. I now want to make them permanently highlighted. So I'm going to choose a fill color. Let's choose a nice purple. And I don't want to stop my macro now because everything's still selected. So I'm going to click off into cell A1, and that is my macro. I now want to stop my macro from recording. So you can either click on that little icon in the bottom left-hand corner, which will stop your macro recording, or go to the Developer tab and click Stop Recording. And that is it, guys. We've recorded our first macro. Woohoo! How exciting. Let's check to make sure. Let's go into macros. And I can see here, highlight number cells. There it is, all right? Now I'm gonna go into another spreadsheet and make sure that that macro is working. So I'm gonna jump across to the profits worksheet. And remember, this macro is gonna highlight all of the pure numbers. So I've got some numbers in here, which are formulas. So you can see where I'm currently clicked. We have formulas, formulas, formulas. But there's also some pure numbers up here as well. So I would expect it to highlight these ones up here, but not these ones down here because those contain formulas. That's what I want it to do, okay? Let's test it, and let's test it using our shortcut key. So Control-Shift-N is what I assigned to that macro, I think. Yes, I did. There we go. So it's highlighted all of those pure numbers which are in this spreadsheet. So really, really simple to do. Does anybody have any questions at this stage, or are you happy for me to continue? Let's have a look. Good going. Someone's saying, can you save in multiple locations? As I said, if you want that macro to be available in different locations, so different spreadsheets, you would need to save it as a personal, into that personal folder. We'll do it again in a moment so you can see. Lovely. Everybody looks reasonably happy so far, which is good stuff. All right, shall we take a look now at how we can make this process even simpler by assigning it to a shortcut key, essentially. I like to assign mine. So if I have a macro, I like to assign it to my quick access toolbar, which is this little thing here, which hopefully most people are aware of and have used before. This is where you can add your most frequently used commands, just to make them easy to access. So if you've got a macro, you can absolutely assign it to a little icon and have it on your quick access toolbar, which means that if you want to run it, you can just click on it and it gets executed, okay? So let's assign the macro that we've just created to an icon. Let's see how we can do that. We're gonna go to File, and we're gonna go down to Options. And we're gonna select Quick Access Toolbar. The first thing you want to do is, from this little drop down at the top where it says Choose Commands From, we're going to select Macros. And there's a whole host, because Excel has its own macros, and sometimes it's a little bit confusing trying to look through, but you'll find that the ones that you've named probably stand out. So you can see all the ones like this are ones that I've named myself. So I can see there, highlight number cells. That's the macro that I just created. And I'm going to click the Add button to add it into my Quick Access toolbar. What I can do then is I can then modify it if I want to. So if I click the Modify button, I can choose to rename it if I want to. I'm not going to because I don't mind that name. And I can also choose to change the icon. So maybe that one's a little bit more appropriate. And click on OK. And there we go. We have our macro on our Quick Access toolbar. And you can just click it and it will execute exactly the same series of commands. Hopefully you can see how this might be useful to you for repetitive things that you do, and you can just set them all up. There's a little bit of work initially, but once you've done it, then it's pretty easy to do. Lovely. All right, let's move on to another example. I'm going to open another spreadsheet. I'm sorry I'm opening and jumping around a little bit, but we've got so many spreadsheets for this session. All right, so going to jump across to the formulas worksheet again. So this is just a very similar spreadsheet to the one that we were just looking at. So I'm going to run the macro Control-Shift-N, which will highlight my, these are my constants, so my pure numbers. Now this is where we're going to step in and take a little bit of a look at the VBA code in the background. So what VBA code is essentially when you create a macro, when you record the steps, Excel converts what you're doing into a language, it's a programming language called VBA, which stands for Visual Basic Applications. And that's how Excel can understand what you're doing. And as I said, VBA is a whole world unto itself. There are courses available online which will take you through VBA, and really, unless you are really interested in VBA or you're a programmer, then you're probably not going to want to delve too much into VBA. I myself don't really know a great deal about VBA. My colleague Todd is very good with VBA, and as I said, that's a webinar that we've run previously, so if you are interested, I will give you the link at the end to where you can access that. But I do find that just understanding what's going on and being able to kind of understand what's going on in the background with the code is quite useful sometimes, particularly if you want to make some minor edits to some of the macros that you're using. So let's take a look at how we jump in and take a look at the VBA code. So I've run this macro. I'm going to go to the developer ribbon and I'm going to go to macros. And we've got a whole host of them in here, so I just want to pick the correct one, so just bear with me. We're going to do, it's the highlight number cells, I think. Which spreadsheet am I in? I'm getting confused as to which spreadsheet I'm in. Let's take a look and click on edit. All right, so this one here, this is the VBA window. So I've gone in and this is the highlight number cells macro. And if you've never seen VBA code before, this might look a little bit like, oh my God, that's a bit scary. As I said, you can use macros and never have to go into the VBA code if you don't want to. You've seen how simple they are to record. This is for people who might want to tweak them a little bit or who are just interested in understanding what's going on in the background. So let's take a look at what we're actually looking at. So this is essentially what we call the project window at the top here. So this little window at the top will show you, and if I just minimize that down, it's a little bit easier to see, will show you all of the spreadsheets that you have open. Okay, so I've got introduction open, I've opened quite a few in this session. And if I maximize them, I can double click and I can see any of the macros that are contained within those spreadsheets. You can see here in the spreadsheet that I'm in, the introduction after recording, I have two macros in this spreadsheet. This one here, which converts the values from millions to that one single decimal place. And then our good old highlight number cells, which is what we just ran. Okay, and this is what the code looks like. All of the code will always start with the word sub. So you'll always see sub followed by the name of the macro. And then you will also have at the bottom end sub as well. So you'll always see that consistently throughout your macros. Anything that you have in here which is in green, so you can see that this is in green, those are comments. So anything in green doesn't actually affect the macro. It's basically just comments. So if you remember when we set up the macro, this one down here, these are this is what I called it, and this is the description I gave it as well. So we're seeing that in the code, and it's also showing us the keyboard shortcut if we have one assigned. All right, so they don't affect the code, it's just comments in there for you. If you wanted to, you could go in and you could delete anything in green. Now, there are pros and cons to doing that. If you want to kind of streamline what you're looking at, because sometimes the code can get quite bulky and bloated, the more steps that you have, the code can get quite long. Sometimes you want to go through and just cut down or cut out all of the things you don't really need, that's fine. But also if you're thinking about sharing this with other people, or even for yourself, if you created a macro 2 years ago, it is sometimes quite useful to be able to see exactly what that macro is going to do. Okay, so be a little bit wary about cutting too many things out. All right, so, sorry, I'm just making sure that I have told you everything in this section because I've got a big long list of notes here. Yes, so this is what I wanted to point out to you, and that is editing. So as I said, we're not going to get into too much about the editing because you can come into here and you can start editing this code and making the macro do different things. Now that is verging more towards VBA programming, but there are some simple things which you might be able to do. So let's take a look at this macro here. So this bottom one, because that's the one that we've been looking at, the highlighting number cells. Even though I don't know VBA that well, I can kind of look at this code and sort of work out a little bit what it's doing. So it's telling me here it's selecting certain cells, it's selecting the constants, and then it's applying certain fills. So solid fills, patterns. It's basically saying that the pattern, these are defaults essentially. And then the thing that stands out most to me is at the end here, it says range A1 select. Now, do you remember when we created that macro, I wanted to make sure that I didn't end the macro with everything selected on the page. And so I finished my macro by clicking in cell A1. Okay, so when I run my macro, my cursor is going to be in cell A1. So that's the most simple thing that I could see here to edit. If I wanted it to change to a different cell, I could come in and say finish in cell B3. So once I run the macro, my cursor will be in cell B3 as opposed to A1. That is an edit in the most simple form, okay? I've edited, I can then click on the save button and that will save that, okay? And I can close down my window. Then if I was to run this macro again, then it's going to end up in cell B3 instead of in cell A1. All right, so that is just a very, very simple way of editing your macros. Lovely. Let's move across to another spreadsheet. You guessed it. Let's go to this phone list. Give it a few seconds to open. Now, this is kind of similar to the example I showed you at the start when we clicked on a button in order to run that macro. So here we've got a spreadsheet where I have 2 buttons at the top, and if I click the button, it's going to sort my list by name, which is already sorted by, or by department. And they act like a little toggle button. And these are really, really useful to have. So I'm going to show you quickly how you can create this button and then assign a macro to it, okay? Because that's a cool little thing that you can add into your spreadsheets. So I'm just going to delete the sort by department and we're going to recreate that one. So this can sometimes be a bit tricky because when you click on it, it runs the macro. So what I do is I right click on it and then delete to delete it. And all I did was we went to insert and we drew a shape. So I'm going to select it and I'm just going to draw a very basic, oops, there we go, basic shape. And you can choose whatever shape you like. I'm going to add a little bit of text. So I'm just going to do sort by department. And again, you can edit this however you want and center it, make it slightly bigger, and let's make it in bold. And I'm going to change the background color to, what should we have? We'll have green, like so, and then I can reposition it wherever I want. So now I have that button there. How do I assign a macro to it? Well, very simple. Right click on the button that you've created and you have an assign macro option. And again, this will take you in and it will show you all of the macros that you have set up. So I can see here, I can see so many because it's showing me all of the macros in all of my open workbooks. And I've got a lot of workbooks open at the moment. So in order to avoid confusion, I'm just going to change it to this workbook. Okay, and I can see both the macros that I created there, which was just basically a recording of sorting a list. And I'm going to assign a sort by department and click on OK. So now I can sort my list by department just by clicking on the button. So you can do that for anything. If you have a picture in your spreadsheet, anything like that, you can also assign that way as well. So really, really nice. All right, let's jump. We've got about 10 minutes left, and I do want to leave 5 minutes at the end. So final 5 minutes. These sessions go so quickly. I've got so much I could show you on this subject matter. Let's kind of ramp it up slightly for the last 5 minutes or so. So let's go back to, we're going to go to, in fact, I'm going to close down some of these spreadsheets because it just starts to get confusing after a while, for me at least. So let's close down some of these. Lovely, and I'm going to open up, let's open up Workbook with Macros. Now again, this is another worksheet where we have some macros, and I'm going to jump straight into the VBA code here. So we're going to go to the developer ribbon, and I could go to macros and do edit to open my VBA window. Another quick way of doing it is if you want to jump straight to the VBA editor, if you do, and I hope this works when I'm on a webinar, Alt F11, it might not. No, I don't think it does when I'm on a webinar, which is a little bit annoying. You should be able to press the Alt, I think it's Alt F11 key, and that will jump you straight into your macro. I'm just double checking that to make sure I've got that right. Yes, it's Alt F11. I think sometimes when I'm on a webinar, my Alt keys don't work exactly as they're supposed to. So I'm going to do it the old school way. So I'm going to go into macros, and I'm just going to select one of them and click on Edit. And I can see here in my VBA window at the top, so this is showing me the workbook that I currently have open. So it's telling me workbook with macros.xlsm, which is the workbook currently behind this window. And you can see all of the different sheets that I have in this workbook and the names of those sheets. And at the top, I've got Module 1 and Module 2, and in each of these is where my macros are contained. Now, this is something, don't be caught out by this if you are looking in. If you just click on the module, it doesn't actually show you the macro. You have to double click on the module to see the macro. I can't tell you how many times I've come in, I've clicked on the module, and I'm like, well, where is my macro? It's the same macro in every single module. You have to double click. All right, so you can see here, I've got 2 separate macros. And what I might want to do is combine both of these macros into one module, essentially. So there's no point having a macro separated across different modules. You can very simply combine them. So it's a simple matter of cutting and pasting, or copying and pasting. So if I do a Control A to highlight everything, and I am going to cut, I'm going to do Control X to cut, back to Module 1. I'm going to go to the bottom and put in a couple of enters, and I'm going to do Control V. And that's allowed me just to combine both of them into one module. And I could then go in and just remove this module if I wanted to, just to keep things nice and tidy. All right, so don't be afraid to kind of move them around and mix them up a little bit. There are some other fancy things that you can do. So for example, you could come in and you could trim down a lot of your macro text as well. So if I wanted to keep this nice and streamlined, I could delete out some of these comments if I don't think they're needed. And you could also remove a lot of this VBA code. Again, that is kind of going a bit into the programming side of things, knowing what you can and can't remove. I think at this level that we're at now, for you guys, I think it's going to be a little bit more difficult for you to be able to ascertain what you can safely remove from your macros. So I'm not going to go too much into that. As I said, if you do want to know a little bit more about editing macros, making them streamlined, making them really work well for you, we do have a very large section on VBA in our Excel course, which is available online. And also we have, my colleague Todd ran a webinar on VBA, which I'm going to give you a link to that in a moment. As I said, we've got 5 minutes. I want to leave it open for questions. I'm going to leave it there at the moment. Hopefully that's given you a nice introduction as to what you can use macros for, why they might be useful. You can see how you can adjust your security settings. You can see how you can run macros that are already in a spreadsheet, and also how you can create your own macros for everyday tasks, how you can assign shortcut keys to them, add them to the quick access toolbar, and also some of the basics on how you can go in and understand the code that you're looking at and make some basic edits. A lot to take in, I know. I'm going to open it up for questions now. I know there's a lot of you on chat. I can see there's like 35 messages scrolling through. I will try and, because we've got the chat panel on this new software and we have Q&A. So I'm going to tackle the Q&A first, because it's a bit more easy for me to read. Let's have a look. So Chrisette Scott, so that's great. So the macro will only run on selected cells. No, it won't. It depends how you've that's just what I did. It's not the same. You can run the macro. It doesn't have to be on just the selected cells. As I said, there's a whole host of other options which you can use, such as relative referencing to get the macro to kind of loop and various things like that. So as I said, I would definitely check out the VBA webinar that we have online if you want to know a little bit more about that. Richard's put, how do you get a list of existing Excel shortcuts so that you do not accidentally try to create them? Great question, Rich. I know. You can Google them. So if you just simply go onto Google and Google Excel shortcuts, it will show you all of those shortcuts. And we've got, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I think it's Nirali, maybe? I apologize. She says, which of your courses teach the other new functions like proper and trim? So that's a great question. So proper and trim, I cover that in quite a few of our different courses. So we cover that in our webinars on cleaning data. We also cover it in webinars on pivot tables and also interactive dashboards as well. So yeah, we cover that in quite a few different webinars. Lovely. Let me scroll down this questions panel. Let's have a look. Okay, so it says, Christina says, if you choose the one that can be opened in all workbooks, does it automatically show up in the macro menu when you open a new sheet, or do you have to save it as a macro enabled first? It will show up if you go into macros. You will be able to see it in here, but it will say personal. So when you save a macro if we go back slightly, if I was recording a macro, when you store your macro, you want to make sure you save it into the personal macro workbook. And then when you try and recall that macro from the macros button, it will say personal at the beginning, so you know that that is a shared macro. Just keeping my eye on the time. Let me jump back to the questions panel. I'm sorry, I can't answer all of these questions. There's so many of you. I will give you an email address at the end, so if I don't get to your question, then please feel free to email me. Amanda, I missed the beginning of this. Will there be a recording? Yes, I'm going to talk to you about that now. Let me take one more question. Let's see. There's lots of people asking about if they can go back and listen to the webinar. Dee Dee's put, will this webinar be available on YouTube so we can watch it again and save it? Great question, Dee Dee, and this is what I want to talk to you about. So let me just jump across to a little bit of information for you guys, because I don't know if you've noticed that a lot of things are changing, which is why it's a little bit chaotic today as we get used to our new processes. But this is really important, actually. Let me just get to my end slide. All right, so we do have a slightly new process, and I get this question. I love hearing from you guys, and I'm more than happy for you to email me. But I do get the same question over and over again every single week, and that is about the recording and the practice file. So the way that it works now is that this is recording, and it will be sent out to you 24 to 48 hours after the webinar ends, okay? It's automated, so the system does it automatically. It's not me sitting here sending you the recording, so that is why it takes 24 hours, because the recording has to process within Zoom, our webinar software, and upload. So we allow 24 to 48 hours. And you will also get a link to the practice file, so the spreadsheet that I'm using today, so you can go through and practice yourself, okay? Look out for it coming into your email. For those of you that don't receive it, I would say the first thing you should do is check your spam, junk, or clutter folders, depending on which email system you use. We have had it on occasion where some of our emails are going into spam or into clutter. So please do check there first of all. If you still don't have it, then please reach out to us, and I'll give you my contact details in a moment, and we can send you the links to the webinar. For those of you who want to access any historical recordings, so we do have our webinars uploaded on our website, so you can access them via this link just here, so excelwithbusiness.com/live-classes. Now, that will only be relevant for really the next week, because to get back to Dee Dee's question, we are moving to YouTube. So yes, all of our stuff is going to be available to you on YouTube, which is going to be really nice because you can save them to playlists, you can watch them later. That's going to be great. So as of, I would say within the next 2 weeks, we'll start giving out the YouTube link. But for now, for today, if you want to view any of the historical recordings, that is where you can view them. And finally, if you want to contact me, you know, just to say hello, or if you have a question, that is absolutely fine. My contact details are just there, so deborah.ashby@filter.com. Always love to hear from our customers, any feedback you have or any questions you might have, and I will do my best to get back to you as soon as I can. If you feel like following me or connecting with me on LinkedIn, then please feel free. You can search for me, Deborah Ashby, and I'll be more than happy to connect with you there as well. All right, guys. I can't believe it. For once, I've finished on time. I'm normally at least 5 minutes over. I know some of you, there are so many questions coming in. It's so hard for me to get to them all. Please, can you forward them to me via email, and I will come back to you all. It's a little bit easier for me to manage it that way with so many questions coming in. I'm going to leave it there, guys. Happy Halloween. I hope you have a safe one. If you did something last night, or maybe you're doing something tonight. I'm doing absolutely nothing, unfortunately, but I hope you do enjoy. All right, guys, I will speak to you next time. Thank you very much. Bye.